At 0211 on a February night in 1944, the harbor at Oswald breathed fog, salt, coal smoke, wet rope. 36 freighters were due on the flood tide, running dark in formation. In this weather, night attacks usually cost 2 ships on average, not sunk by torpedoes, but lost to panic turns and collisions after the first bomb fell. Everyone on the mole knew that number. It lived in their hands. Roy Henley, 23, checked the searchlight panel in Bay 3. 2 giant lamps hunched under canvas like sleeping oxen. Their gearboxes could slew the head silently long before the filament ever glowed. The new radar, a boxy, humming set, meant to lock onto aircraft and hand bearings to the guns, stuttered tonight. Fog made its range line jitter, and the bearing gate creep like a compass pressed near iron. In plain English, the electronic eye had a twitch. Down in Sound Hut 1, Lily Banks leaned into her headset. Her instrument was primitive but honest. 2 big ears that compared the left and right loudness of an engine and gave you a course in seconds. When electronics blurred, air still told the truth. Multiple stepped formation, she said. Bearing 249 low. Crosswind from port is pushing them. Correction 7 degrees starboard over 15 seconds. 7 degrees in this fog meant a pilot would be wrong by the width of the harbor mouth at the moment he had to commit. Roy's mind supplied the rest. If you show him a false line just before he rolls, he will follow the lie because his body already started the move. Foreman Murch shouldered into the doorway, rain on his hat brim. "Standard ladder," he said. "Track on the set, lights full on my mark. Better to see and be seen than shoot blind." "Set's drifting," Roy answered. "If we light now, we give them a ruler to dive on." Murch hated cleverness, but he'd flown barrage balloons in 40 and had watched 1 battery die because a triggerman lit too soon. He looked past Roy to Lily's window. She lifted 2 fingers, hold course, correction steady, and then tapped them twice. Time to commit. Roy opened the small service door he shouldn't have added. Inside, a thumb-sized circuit he'd soldered himself. A resistor-capacitor pair that smoothed out voltage burps so the filaments wouldn't flash when motors started, and a silent slew switch that let the towers turn without light. In one line, move the eyes, keep the eyelids shut. "Give me 5 seconds to swing dark to Lily's correction," he said. "Then a half-second tick where no plane is. The guns fire at her truth, not our light." Murch held his stare a heartbeat longer than comfort. 5, he said at last, because the radar was lying and the sound girl wasn't, and because he'd rather bet on a controlled risk than a predictable mistake. Roy threw the silent slew. The big heads rotated with a cat's purr. The mole stayed black. He feathered the improvised trigger, a 0.6-second white stitch into empty sky, far enough off the real line that no gunner would chase it, and short enough that a diving pilot would. Above the fog, the leader saw the blink where his body wanted a reference and rolled. By the time tracers rose, not toward the flash but ahead of Lily's bearing like a lead thrown for a runner, the Junkers was already in a committed arc, too low and too far left. A hard engine note broke, turned into a hammering cough, then into the flat slap of water. The splash boomed against the breakwater like a door slammed in an empty house. "Leader down," Lily said, not triumph, but inventory. "Wing 2 late to follow. Same correction holds." "Again," Murch said, voice settled now. The fear had somewhere to go. Roy swung dark a second time. The radar's echo smeared. Lily's numbers didn't. Another pinprick blink, just enough to hook an eye, and the guns answered the invisible line. The third aircraft bobbed out of the dive early, jettisoned and clawed for height, torpedoes falling harmlessly beyond the channel. The fourth never rolled. A string of red-orange pucks stitched the fog where he would have been. Then nothing but the hiss of hot metal meeting cold rain. 17 minutes from the first report, the first mast light of the convoy dipped between the buoys. 36 hulls in, 0 missing. 2 with peeled paint and dented railings from shrapnel, but their screws still bit water. On nights like this, the harbor usually paid a blood tithe to physics and fear. Tonight, the ledger showed different arithmetic. Murch's hand came down heavy on Roy's shoulder. "You put that panel back to book at dawn," he said quietly. It wasn't anger. It was an adult's way of saying, "You did right, and nobody must know you did it that way." Roy nodded. He knew how stories were written after sunrise. The report would praise the guns and note that radar support was adequate under adverse conditions. Sound might get a sentence. The word light would appear only as a unit of measure. In the hut, Lily removed her headset and began coiling cable with surgeon care. "Crosswind eased to 5, she murmured to no one. She looked once at Bay 3, saw Roy through wet glass and lifted 2 fingers again. Hold, then made a tiny clockwise circle with her wrist. Good swing, good timing. Out beyond the breakwater, the sea exhaled. Behind an unmarked service door in Bay 3, a nameless switch cooled in the damp air and waited for whatever the night would call it next. At 0341, the fog began to thin, not by lifting but by tearing, long pale rents that showed a smear of stars and then sutured closed again. The sea inside the harbor settled from breath to pulse. The men on the mole did what men do after a fight. They laughed too loudly, they smoked too fast, they checked their hands. Roy did not laugh. He stood with Murch at the back of Bay 3, watching the little unmarked door as if it might open by itself and put him on a charge. Lily drifted in with a mug of tea that tasted like the inside of a kettle. She put it beside him without looking and started making notes with a carpenter's pencil on the back of a weather form. "Corrections held within half a degree," she said. "Wind backed 2 knots in the last run, but not enough to spoil the lead." Murch rubbed a thumb along the metal lip of the panel. "You 2 will get me hanged and thanked in the same week," he said. "Turn that switch off. Then we go upstairs and let the Navy tell us what we did." Upstairs was the harbor office, warped map table, a black telephone that rang like a fire bell, 3 chairs that had been sat in by 100 different pairs of trousers, same shape left behind by all of them. A lieutenant commander with a pencil mustache and eyes too bright for the hour introduced himself as Thacker. Behind him, a civilian in a raincoat leaned against the sill, not writing, trying to look like a man who belonged nowhere in particular. "Gentlemen," Thacker said, glancing at Lily and amending smoothly, "and Miss, congratulations are in order. 36 in, 2 damaged, 2 enemy down, 1 presumed ditched. Radar track was intermittent but serviceable. Guns fired with economy." He looked around as if waiting for an objection to the word serviceable. Murch opened his mouth, then closed it. Lily's pencil ticked once against the paper. Roy felt the weight of the little door downstairs find the back of his neck. The civilian, raincoat, soft shoes, tilted his head. "Intermittent," he said. "Tell me about that." "Moisture," Roy said before Murch could turn him to stone with a look. "The set hunts in thick weather. The bearing gate creeps when the drive gets wet. We were tracking by sound corrections for the last 2 passes." Thacker smiled like a man indulging a child. "All very plucky. The radar's been a revelation up and down the coast. First-class bit of kit. We'll get you a spare gate drive and a better hood." Roy thought of the blink in dead air, the way a body followed the wrong star once its muscles had begun the roll. He kept his mouth shut and took a sip of tea that had gone cold in one swallow. "Miss Banks," the civilian said, turning to Lily, "your numbers, consistent with training, or did you improvise?" Lily looked at him with that listening stillness that made men lower their voices without knowing why. "The sky doesn't care about training," she said. "Engines are louder on the windward ear. That will always be true. We corrected by what was true." Thacker nodded as if she'd recited a line he liked. "Splendid. We'll note that sound was decisive under adverse conditions. Now, about the searchlights. Any premature illuminations?" "No, sir," Murch said. The words were true in the way that shelter is true even when it is built of scraps. Lights followed bearings, no strays. The civilian's gaze moved once across Roy's face, enough to notice the tired underneath and the adrenaline over it. Not accusing, just taking inventory. "Good," he said to no one. "Very good." They were dismissed with commendations that sounded like rain on a tin roof. Loud, harmless, ordinary. Back down the stairs, Murch put a hand on the banister and didn't move for a long second. "I'm not in the habit of lying to officers," he said. "You didn't," Lily said. "You picked which truth to tell." Murch huffed something that might have been a laugh or a cough. "We'll see how long that holds." He sent Lily to sleep and Roy to breakfast, and went to his office to write what had happened, without writing what had happened. He put down times, bearings, wind. He put down that radar support was intermittent and sound corrections effective. He did not put down silent slew, half-second tick, switch. At 09:07, a message arrived from Sector. Request clarification on lighting protocols in fog. Reports suggest improved timing observed. Murch stared at the paper. He thought about the night the barrage balloon rope had sung like a harp string just before it snapped and cut the hands that gripped it. He thought about rules that saved lives and rules that cost them. He took out a fresh sheet and drew 3 boxes: radar, sound, light. In the light box he wrote, "Standby slew on bearing, illumination minimum duration to confirm aim." He did not add the words that made those instructions possible. He signed his name and sent it up the chain. The day ran its routine. Men slept the sleep that follows bargaining with physics. Dockers yelled at cranes. The harbor inhaled and exhaled ships. In mid-afternoon, Roy found Lily on the breakwater, coat collar turned up against a wind that had decided to come from a different county. "I put a bypass in the snubber," he said. "If someone opens the panel, it looks like spare lugs." "You're going to take it out, Roy?" He stared down at the stones that held back the North Atlantic with a confidence he didn't entirely share. "I'm going to put it where it can't trip by accident. That's different." Lily watched a gull knife the air like a bad thought. "You know, we didn't win because we tricked them with a blink. We won because the blink wasn't where the guns were going. If we'd chased the light ourselves, we'd have lit their way in." "I know," he said. "The blink is just bait. The hook was your 7 degrees. She shrugged one shoulder, not modesty so much as accuracy. "Truth is cheap. It's paying attention that costs." At dusk, a lorry ground onto the mole with crates labeled lamps. Fragile. Roy and the lamp man swapped war lies and handling precautions. In the last crate, under the lamp glasses and packing straw, was a sealed envelope with his name and Murch's. Inside, an order stamped trial, not for broad distribution. It was a protocol, stark and simple. In fog, maintain head rotation on assigned bearing without illumination. Confirm bearing with minimal visible exposure only to verify aim. Fire upon non-visual cues. No diagrams, no parts list, no switch. At the bottom, a line that could have been joke or warning. If it isn't in the book, it didn't happen. Sector blessed it, Murch said, reading over Roy's shoulder. Relief and caution fought to tie the same knot inside his chest. They've given us the thing we did without the way we did it. Roy smiled with half his mouth. Good. That way, if it works, they can love it. If it fails, they can blame us. The next night proved the point. The weather went from fog to rain to fog again, like a man changing his mind. The radar's bearings sharpened as the drive dried, then wobbled when the next squall slid across the basin. On the second run, an enemy pilot didn't bite on the blink. He stayed high and tried to force the guns to expose themselves. Lily's correction drifted 3 degrees, then snapped back. She raised a hand, curved a finger, a tiny command to lead the lead. The guns held their fire against what they could see, and fired at what they couldn't. A torpedo smacked the breakwater 100 yards out and turned into a white boil that erased 3 days of gull dirt, and nothing else. Between runs, Thacker's civilian stepped out of the shadow of a crane, raincoat darker with new rain. He didn't introduce himself this time. "You're turning the heads without lighting," he said to Roy, as if stating the weather. "And you're stinging the sky where no one is, so the man who wants a line will take the wrong one." Roy's stomach dropped and then climbed back to where it belonged. "We don't expose unless we can't help it. We don't fire at flashes. We fire where the sound will be." The man nodded once like a metronome test. "Keep doing it. There's talk about formalizing at 3 ports. If anyone asks where the idea came from, it came from the weather." He paused. "And Miss Banks." When he was gone, Murch spat into the rain without rancor. "Spooks," he said. "They don't lift, they don't load, they don't swear properly, but they know when to say thank you without saying it." By morning, there was a message in the box for Lily. "Sound correction protocols requested for distribution. Attach examples of wind drift adjustment." Her name did not appear. The paper smelled of damp and ink and invisibility. Before she went off shift, Lily walked to Bay 3 and rested her palm against the panel where Roy's nameless switch lived behind its little door. "It worked because the guns didn't chase it," she said. "Promise me we won't teach men to chase flashes." Roy locked the door and put the key in his pocket. "We'll teach them to listen," he said, "and to blink only when we must." Outside, low clouds stacked like slate on the horizon. Another convoy was due in 2 nights. The weather was already writing its own orders. Roy thought of the line in the trial protocol, "If it isn't in the book, it didn't happen," and wondered, not for the first time, who decided which books got written and which doors stayed unmarked. The mole creaked. The sea breathed. Somewhere out where the fog began, a pilot who had gone home alive the night before told his mates that the British lights were going funny, that they winked when they shouldn't and didn't when they should, and that the guns seemed to know the future. He left out the part where he had followed a blink that wasn't there, because even to himself that sounded like superstition. On the breakwater, Lily looked at the windsock, then at the gulls. 5 from west, she said to the air. "We'll call it 7. The convoy was a rumor again by morning, numbers on a chalkboard, wake lines flattened by time. What stayed were smudges, scorched paint on a railing, a spent case trapped in a plank gap, the memory of a sound that had broken and not come back. Stories began their usual migration from mouths to paper, to shelves, shedding heat with each stop. Murch found Roy in Bay 3 with the panel open, not daring, just cleaning. Salt blooms on copper become lies if you let them. He passed a rag and watched the younger man work like a horologist with a seasick clock. "We've got sector at 1600, Murch said. "They'll want to bless what we did while pretending they invented it." "And we want them to," Roy said. "If they invent it, more ships live." Murch said. "Virtue by delegation, wear a tie." The meeting was small, which was the only kind that mattered. Lieutenant Commander Thacker arrived with a smile built for memoranda. With him came the raincoat civilian and a clerk, whose job was to write names only when told. The civilian set a folder on the table as if it might try to walk away. "Trial results," he said. 3 ports, 11 engagements, fog or rain. Compared to last month's comparable nights, Successful hostile dives down 38%. Ammunition expenditure flat. Friendly illumination incidents nil. Shipping losses nil during trial windows. The phrase in the circular will be silent beam. Murch rolled the words in his mouth and swallowed. Good phrase. Fits in a mouth and a margin. Keep it short and it will survive being taught, the civilian said. Our improvements tend to be longer than our nights. Thacker cleared his throat, keen to appear essential. Radar contributions were intermittent, he read. Sound corrections decisive. Lighting, revised protocols recommended for adoption at commander's discretion. Lily, who had not been offered a chair and had taken one anyway, said, Say it plainer. Don't make a lighthouse for men who want one. Thacker's smile accepted the rephrasing without granting royalties. Quite. The civilian slid a paper to Lily. Request for your wind drift notes. We'll publish them as field observations. You won't be cited. Good, Lily said. Then nobody will argue with the gulls. He turned to Roy. Your lights. How do we describe them without teaching the wrong habit? Rotate in silence, Roy said. Blink only to verify, shorter than a man can change his mind. Fire not for the flash, but for the forecast. Put that on the page, the civilian told the clerk, who wrote forecast and fumbled the E, then crossed it neatly with a single line. They left with their tidy numbers and empty sources. After the door closed, Murch leaned back until the chair complained. That's the kindness of institutions, he said. They keep you out of the story so the story can go further. Kindness with a muzzle, Lily said, tucking her notes into the spine of her log. I can live with that. Men who need names will put theirs on later. Men who need ships will put them in sooner. That evening, rain came through as if it had appointments beyond the harbor. The mole glistened like a new scar. Between showers, a lorry dumped crates of lamp glass and a separate, smaller box addressed to no one. Inside was a one-page doctrine, 3 lines and a footnote. Keep heads turning on bearing without illumination. Expose briefly to confirm aim only when non-visual cues agree. Shoot where the sound will be, not where the light just was. Footnote. If asked, the weather taught you. Murch folded it and put it in his breast pocket, behind his ration card, over his heart like a second, thinner one. If this gets men doing the right thing faster, he said, I'll forgive it for leaving us out. Leaving us out keeps it clean, Roy said. He locked the little door behind which the switch cooled, a discreet mole bone under skin, and hung the key on its nail, then paused, took a stub of blue chalk, and made a tiny cross on the keybow, a private marker, a reminder that the door existed and that it stayed shut by choice. Insurance? Murch asked. Conscience, Roy said. Near midnight, the rain gathered itself into a wall and then remembered its manners and stepped aside. A patrol reported engines beyond the horizon, then lost them to weather. The radar hunted like a dog that still remembered its tricks, but not where it had buried them. The sound hut breathed. Lily listened. Shifted, she said to the air. 3 degrees and then 6. Not yet. Not yet. The first approach fainted high, testing for the eager switch. The lights did not itch. The guns did not beg. A short exposure in empty sky bit no one. The enemy did not dive there. When he finally came, he came clean, and the math did the rest. After, the civilian in the raincoat appeared again, as if he lived in the cracks of doors. He wasn't smiling. You had a visitor today from the board, he told Murch. He wanted to know why your lights were late. I said your men are learning to be precisely late. Late saves, Murch said. Early points. Keep teaching that. They'll try to write it into a table, and you can't table weather. If anyone asks who's responsible, say doctrine. If they press, say fog. If they don't accept that, Send for me. We don't know your name, Lily said. That's why you can send for me anywhere, he said, and left them a small card with no letters on it and a smell of paper. Morning came with a washed sky and gulls busy with their union business. Roy unlocked the panel, checked the nameless circuit, checked the sweep gear that let giant glass eyes turn without winking, and closed it again. He hung the key on its nail with its shy blue cross, a small faith that secrets can be honest if they save lives, and if they stay secrets by choice, not by fear. He joined Lily at her usual piece of wind. They'll roll this out, he said. It'll go to ports we'll never see. And be done wrong in 5 of them, she said. And right in 2, and partly right in the rest, which will be enough for men to go home who wouldn't have. He nodded. 38% fewer successful dives, he said, testing the number in the open. That's not a story, that's a tide. Numbers are stories that learn to sit up straight, Lily said. Let the tidy men have them. We'll keep the messy ones. Epilogue. The Ledger. They kept 11 night engagements in fog, rain across 2 coastal sectors during trial. 38% successful hostile dive torpedo runs. 0 friendly illumination incidents. Ammo use plus 0%. Convoy losses 0 during trial windows. 1 protocol adopted without authors. 1 set of wind notes anonymized. 1 key with a tiny blue cross that no book will list. Silent beam became a phrase men could remember under weather, which is the only test a phrase must pass. The harbor sighed like a thing relieved to have lungs. Out past the markers, the Atlantic went on with its old work, which was to pull and to reckon. On the mole, a small chalk mark on a small key dried in a small sun and meant more than it looked. Epilogue. The numbers that stayed time in contact. 17 minutes from first detection. To the convoy leader crossing the channel buoys. Convoy outcome. 36 ships in, 0 lost. 2 with superficial shrapnel damage. Both remained underway. Enemy force, 6 Ju-88s. 2 downed, 1 forced to ditch. 3 disengaged without attack. Silent beam trials, 2 coastal sectors. 11 night engagements in fog, rain. Successful hostile dives, torpedo runs. 38% versus matched nights. Friendly misillumination incidents, 0. Ammunition expenditure plus 0%. Convoy losses during trial windows, 0. Sensors and cues. Radar bearing jitter observed on up to 19% of sweeps at peak humidity. Average sound-based course correction, next 0.8 issued 2.4s before commit. Lights and power, 0.6s empty sky pings used as visual bait without drawing own fire. RC snubber reduced line spikes by 27-32%, preventing unintended lamp strikes. Paper trail, 1 protocol adopted without authorship. 1 wind drift memo published as field observations. 0 decorations, 1 small key with a blue chalk cross that no ledger lists. Rule that outlived the night. Turn in the dark, show less than a man can change his mind, and shoot for where the sound will be, not where the light just was.